And good morning, DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And I'd say thus far, Brocktober has been pretty enjoyable. At least it was on Saturday night for those of us who are Georgia fans. 51-13, dominant win against Kentucky. I also said on Twitter that it may be Beck-timber as well. Some people kind of push back on that because it's not exactly September anymore, but you get the point. It was a great day for Brock Bowers, great day for Carson Beck, more on that in a moment, and a great day to be a Georgia fan there on a Saturday night between the hedges. Georgia fans doing everything they could to make that a tough environment for Kentucky, and it worked. So in today's show, it's talk about Carson Beck. It's talk about Brock Bowers. It's talk about order being restored here in college football. It's John Stinchcomb joining us. There's some recruiting news that we do have to get to, and I'm going to try not to spend too long on this because I want to make sure I don't say something I regret. But interesting recruiting news we're going to touch on for a moment here on the show there as well. And also a wild weekend around college football. You can sort of tell that a different knob has been turned up right now. Georgia's kind of getting into its midseason form. The rest of the country's sort of starting to fall into place here. And we had wild results. We're going to try to cover it all. This is one of those days in which I'm going to do my best to squeeze it all in here, and we'll see if we can keep the pace going and not get too bogged down on any one thing because there is so much to discuss. Y'all can judge us at the end to tell us how we did. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
On a day like this, it seems to be only one question appropriate to begin our show. Simply put, how about them dogs? 51-13 against Kentucky on Saturday. A lot to discuss from the game, but it seems appropriate to begin here. To the extent that there were doubters for Georgia here during this offseason, one of the questions they brought up, perhaps fairly so, was how would Georgia make the transition to a new starting quarterback? You had the same starting quarterback for each of Georgia's last two national championship seasons. New quarterback here right now. There was skepticism out there about Carson Beck. And Beck was apparently noticing all of that because as he goes out last night and has the game of his at least short-lived life on Saturday by thrashing Kentucky, putting up more than 300 yards, big stats in the first half, 4 touchdown passes overall. Apparently Beck has been paying attention to everything that has been said about him, and whatever you want to use for your fuel and whatever you want to use for your motivation, this is a Georgia team that last year was certainly feeding off of what it kind of viewed as some doubters, feeding off of people who were naysayers. Even if some of that was exaggerated by Nolan Smith, it still seemed to work. And apparently this team's got a little bit of that left over in it there as well. Because Beck on Instagram, this has been shared widely on social media. Let me show you what Carson Beck put out on Sunday about the idea of what motivates you more than anything. He says disrespect, or at least he uses this little meme here to kind of let folks know that right now he is motivated and being fueled by what he views as disrespect. How much of that was there for Carson Beck? I don't know. I guess certain people have seen more than others perhaps when it comes to that. But realistically, moving forward, the only thing that there should be is a high level of respect because right now Carson Beck is playing at a very high level as Georgia's starting quarterback. All doubts seemingly now removed about whether or not he's the kind of guy that can lead Georgia to where it wants to go if he continues to play, not just the way that he played on Saturday, his best game thus far, but for the totality of this season, first half, which concluded there on Saturday, first half of the regular season, which concluded on Saturday, then Carson Beck is more than capable of being, air quotes here, the guy for Georgia. But Saturday also represented not just a continuation of what has been going on for Georgia, but also a new step forward for just how dominant this offense can be. Georgia had failed to score 30 points in its 2 previous games against SEC teams, but put up 50 on Saturday and played consistently for the full 4 quarters of the game. Now, when it was over, Beck attributed that higher level of explosiveness, that better level of success, to a little bit of a different edge from Georgia during practice. He was pressed on exactly what he meant by that. This was the explanation Carson offered. Now, we'll tell you, locker room stuff after the game, which is really more like outside the locker room, kind of underneath the stadium. You got people cheering. You got stuff being moved. This is not like awesome audio from Carson because of all the room noise that's going on there, but hopefully you can still make out what he says here in terms of why he felt like the edge that Georgia had at practice this week was so different. This is what Carson said.
And obviously we have an SEC East opponent. That's our goal, try to win the SEC East. We're coming into our house and we're at home. We know the fans are going to bring the energy, so that's going to help us a little bit. But just throughout the day, having the mindset and the focus to come out strong and to execute on every single point that, we've been trying to make and trying to get better on, that's kind of the focus.
So a lot going on there, obviously, but at the end, what Beck says is, hey, different mindset, different focus, playing an SEC East team. This in a roundabout way was sort of a de facto, I don't want to say there's still many more games to go, but in the eyes of a lot of people, this would be the game that decided the SEC East because Kentucky was ranked and unbeaten. And so, therefore, Georgia, according to Beck, had a different level of energy at practice because of the stakes of this game and the fact they did want to execute at a more complete and a higher level in a game like this than they had at any point in time this season. That is an idea that Kirby Smart did not quite agree with, that they had done some different things at practice. Smart sort of pushed back on that notion when he spoke in his post-game press conference on Saturday, but nonetheless was very impressed with the way that his offense played overall. This is Smart's response to the same topic.
We didn't do anything different in practice. I don't know what it's referring to. Maybe offense changed something up to start faster. I don't know. We did the same practices we've been doing. I attribute the success starting to execution. Carson was really in rhythm early, and when you run the ball and you have play action and your offensive line protects, you have good throwers and catchers, you're going to do well. They did well with us. When you have good pass protectors and a good thrower, and you've got the ability to run the ball, it makes it hard to defend as a defensive team because they stand back there, they have all day because they're protected, and you can't cover them that long.
This is just so true. And one of the things you sometimes hear in football, the idea of playing both left-handed and right-handed, that doesn't mean left side, right side. Oftentimes that means the ability to throw when you want to run when you want to. When you're kind of throw and punch with both hands, you become a very tough team to deal with. And perhaps when Carson says, hey, things were different at practice, maybe what he's also referencing there was, the idea there was such an emphasis put on the whole notion of Bloody Tuesday. That's been the thing that Georgia's been famous for a long time, that is excessively physical practices on Tuesday to make sure that the game feels easier than the stuff you've been doing during practice. That was apparently ratcheted up a notch, as you might expect, because Kentucky does have a little bit of reputation for being physical itself, and so therefore Georgia wanted to be the more physical of the two teams. Georgia has needed to get its running game going at a little bit different rate. Kendall Milton's healthy return on Saturday made that more possible, healthier than he's been all year long. He's at 5.9 yards per carry. Dejon Edwards is at 6 yards per carry. Offensive line moving piles, opening holes, creating opportunities, and that sort of Bloody Tuesday style physicality that Georgia put on display during practice, as Smart said, that's probably one of the things that did help this passing attack be as potent as it was. And y'all, that's what Georgia has been, and we're going to get more into this here in a moment. But Saturday was a day in which Georgia just sort of felt like Georgia, right? This was the Georgia that we have seen for so much of the last couple of years, and this is the Georgia that we saw on Saturday. But Carson Beck, rightly, is also going to get a lot of the credit for that. I thought it was really fun at the end of the game. Kendall Milton, who we mentioned a moment ago, coming back healthy from injury, having himself a very nice game, being a very big contributor to this Georgia offensive performance. But when you look at the 4 touchdowns, when you look at all that Carson Beck was doing through the air, Kendall Milton after the game had a very fun comparison for Beck. Once again, what he was seeing from Carson and how he was propelling that Georgia offense for the full 4 quarters on Saturday. This is what Milton said about that.
I'm proud of Carson. I told Carson he's shooting out there like Steph Curry, But, I'm proud of my boy because at the end of the day, he's been talked about so much. He's been doubted. He's been, overlooked. And, for him to come out and have a game like this, I'm happy for him, But at the end of the day, Carson, he's one of the most humble people I know. I know he's going to go and film tomorrow, see what he did wrong, and come back on Monday and, make those correct changes.
I think to a certain extent, some of the doubt, some of the skepticism that perhaps has existed around Beck from national media types, whomever else, some of that I think is just a byproduct of the extra scrutiny a quarterback gets at a place like Georgia because the standard is winning a national championship. And so while you could look at Carson Beck's overall skill set, I don't think anyone has doubted could he be a good quarterback. I don't think anyone has doubted could he be a capable quarterback. But the questions end up being, can this be the kind of quarterback that can lead Georgia to a national championship? It's just a different level of scrutiny. It's the same kind of stuff that Georgia faces as a team. When it's undefeated through 5 games and yet there's nitpicking going on and things being kind of heavily scrutinized, it's not because people don't think Georgia's good. It's because when you aspire to be number one, there is just a different level of analysis that's going to take place. And so even under the biggest possible microscope, when you looked at Georgia on Saturday, looked the part of being number one. And when you look at Carson Beck, once again, under the biggest possible microscope, even those who, like Reese Davis and others, who've kind of said, can Carson Beck be the kind of quarterback that leads Georgia to a national championship? On Saturday, Carson Beck certainly proved himself capable of doing that. We don't know what the next few games are going to look like. The next hopeful 9 games left on this Georgia schedule are going to look like, what the outcome of those games are going to be. But we certainly, if you're a Georgia fan or just an observer of college football, have enough evidence to now suggest that Beck has absolutely solidified his spot here as the Bulldogs starting quarterback. He's a big fan favorite at the moment, and certainly someone who is very seemingly capable of taking Georgia to all the heights that it aspires to go to before this season comes to an end. Now, with that said, I want to shift gears to something else, because ultimately, this is what I believe the biggest takeaway from Saturday was. When you go out and limit Kentucky to 13 points and go out there and score 50-plus on your own, all of a sudden after a 6-0 start for Georgia, everything suddenly feels very normal again. For a good while here now, I think we would say there are certain aspects of the season. In fact, I've even said this a couple of times. There are certain aspects of the season that have just sort of felt a little bit weird to me. The games were kind of piling up. The season was getting away from us in terms of the fact that you sort of blink your eyes and it's halfway done, and it feels like we were still sort of waiting to see the best of Georgia, waiting to see everything that Georgia could be, perhaps wondering if this was just going to be a Georgia team that has some limitations, and you could point to this game or the one half of this game or the one quarter of this game. And you could sort of start circling these sort of small sample sizes and saying, hey, if this is all Georgia is, and then Georgia's below a national championship level. Well, it's amazing how quickly one big game can kind of change the mentality around a team. And a lot of this is not just perception. A lot of this can actually be measured with statistics, because after Saturday's game, there's actually kind of an amazing thing that's occurred for Georgia. They are now essentially like right back to where they've always been. I want to show this on the screen here for a moment. So these are Georgia's rankings and the stats that kind of matter the most to me because they're the easiest to understand. It's the number of points you score, the number of points you give up, what you do on a per-play basis, the yards per play you get on offense, and the yards per play you allow on defense. There are fancier stats than that, but I'm not quite so sure those fancier stats get you to anything more revealing and truthful than just sort of basic counting stats here that are, I think, pretty easy to understand. And if you're doing very well in stats like this, you're just probably doing very well overall. So here's where Georgia now ranks in what I think are easy to understand, very telling and predictive stats. Georgia, when it comes to the points they're scoring per game, they are 10th in America right now at 40.7 points per game. When it comes to offensive yards per play, Georgia's also 10th in America right now at 7.14 yards per play. On the defensive side of the ball, Georgia allowing 13 points per game. That's also good for 10th in America. When it comes to yards per play allowed on defense, Georgia's 9th right now, allowing 4.32 yards per play. That all sounds pretty good, but let me give you some additional context. The thing that made Georgia last 2 years is that Georgia essentially was about the only team in America kind of playing at like a top 10 level or certainly a top 5 level on both offense and defense. That's the complementary football that Kirby Smart talks about a lot. That's what made Georgia the last couple of years. There may be an offense that's playing better than Georgia's. There may have been a defense that was close to playing as well as Georgia was, but really nobody in America the last 2 years has played both offense and defense as well as Georgia's playing on both sides of the ball. Well, guess what? Those numbers that I just gave you, points scored per game, points allowed per game, offensive yards per play, defensive yards per play allowed. Do you know in those 4 categories, there's only one other team besides Georgia that's in top 10 in all 4 of those categories? That's Dan Lanning in Oregon, so credit to Lanning for a good season. So here we are after 6 weeks of the regular season, once again, of the what we think of as true national championship contenders. Perhaps Oregon ends up being one, but what we think of as like true national championship contenders It's sort of just Georgia. Right now, Ohio State's playing better defense. They're playing offense. Right now, you got a team, like Michigan that's played really well defensively. They haven't necessarily, kind of opened things up on offense as of yet. You can sort of go through and sort of cite examples here and examples there that once again, when it comes to both sides of the ball, statistical dominance measured by easy-to-understand numbers. How many points you score, how many points you allow, what you do on a per-play basis in terms of your total yards collected here. Really, it's only Oregon that's doing as well as Georgia is in those key, important, crucial categories. So it's not just your perception that says, hey, it feels like order's kind of been restored here. It sort of feels like Saturday did that for a lot of people. Categories, statistically, all of a sudden, Georgia kind of back to looking where they're supposed to look. Georgia picked up 15 new first-place votes in the AP poll this week, which were not Georgia votes a week ago. Now, Kirby Smart will also tell you humility is also only 1 week away, and that's also important and true to remember. Let's keep that in mind. But for now, Georgia's kind of back to where we're used to seeing it be. The number one team in the country, and for the moment, it does not appear, at least in my mind, that anyone else is particularly close. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella, Window and Door of Georgia. We are happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us, live on video, 9:45. That's our first and 15, DawgNation.com, and on the DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, all those video platforms. We're on the radio, Athens Sports Radio 960, The Ref. We're on all the podcast platforms there as well. So far, so good on those. We had a little bit of a brief hiccup the other day. It got me all hot and bothered and panicked. As it turns out, I probably jumped the gun there on that. Everything seems to be fine. Either way, we're just glad to have you with us. And we're happy to have Pella, Window and Door of Georgia, bringing it to us here and making it all possible here today. And listen, on Saturday night, between the hedges, what a home field advantage Georgia enjoyed. You talk about being comfortable and happy to be at home. Georgia certainly played that way. And when it comes to being comfortable in your own home there as well, no one helps you do that probably better than our friends at Pella, Window and Door of Georgia, because one of the best things you can do to take care of what is perhaps the most important investment you have, your own home, it's the place where your emotional connections are made. It's the place where some of your financial resources are invested and, contained. Well, when it comes to taking good care of that, better windows, better doors, great way to do that, especially as it starts to get a little cool outside, because let's face it, it was 40-something degrees this morning. That draftiness that kind of starts to creep into your home, that little bit of chill. You don't want to feel that because the windows aren't sealed properly. The doors aren't as nice and good as they could be. Well, Pella, Window and Door of Georgia, they're going to make sure your home feels good on the inside, looks good on the outside. That's always a really good thing. Improving your curb appeal, perhaps improving your resale value there as well. You've heard me say this for years, and now it's time for you to take that next step. Have that no-pressure consultation with a Pella expert to kind of offer advice to you on the installation options, the full product line, financing options, if need be. They'll show you the samples. And if you go to the Experience Center there in Duluth, and I like this, this is a fancy phrase, I think I have what you call like a tactile fixation. I like to touch things. So I like to touch the windows and the doors. You can kind of feel them. It's substantial, right? It's like this is a real product, right? And it's obviously better than this sort of, kind of low-grade stuff that other folks might want to kind of push on you. The Pella product is just obviously superior. And so when you go to the Experience Center in Duluth, you can see that for yourself. You can also take advantage of great savings right now. Between now and October 28th, you can get 10% off your entire project or no payments, no interest until 2025. That's good stuff. So go see them in Duluth or call them, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. PellaofGA.com/DawgNation is also the website. PellaofGA.com/DawgNation. Just tell them that BA from DawgNation Daily said they would take good care of you, because I am quite confident that they will, because Pella, Window and Door of Georgia, is viewed to be the best. All right, it's John Stinchcomb here coming up in just a moment. Prior to that, I'm going to go around the doghouse. And I did something a little bit weird on Friday, but I got some good feedback on this. And I'm always happy when I do something a little bit weird, a little bit abstract, and it kind of lands with people the way that I want it to. And it seemed like on Friday this kind of landed. What I said going into the game against Kentucky, for whatever reason, a game that seemingly had nothing to do with Kentucky was kind of on my mind. I was thinking a lot about the Orange Bowl against Michigan in 2021, or at the end of the 2021 season. And I was kind of thinking about the idea of the way in which Georgia said it played with a chip on its shoulder that day, coming out and having a chip on its shoulder on Saturday, that'd be really good. But also the biggest takeaway was, and this was the part that people seem to really enjoy, And we'll kind of make this sort of our Brocktober update for today, if you will. But what I'd said going into the on Friday's show, going into Saturday's game against Kentucky, is I always thought it was really, really telling that Georgia, knowing that Michigan, smart defensive-minded football staff over there, Jim Harbaugh is a good coach. Michigan's a very good team. Certainly a part of this playoff conversation here this year. Absolutely. Perhaps the biggest threat to Georgia nationally. Maybe that's what Michigan is here right now. We'll find that out maybe in the weeks to come. But the point is, against a good Michigan team, Michigan having seen the way in which Georgia was using Brock Bowers as a freshman, what we said was, with a month, I should say, to stop and prepare its defense to stop Brock Bowers, the fact of the matter is they threw to Bowers 3 times in the opening drive, including a wide-open touchdown. And at that point in time, the stage was set for a dominant Georgia win, all because Michigan's hopes of stopping Brock Bowers were completely eliminated. And Georgia's ability to get the ball to Bowers using pre-snap motion and things like that to kind of create open space for him clearly worked. And I said, hey, going into this game on Saturday, after all loudmouths like me have been saying about Brocktober this and Brocktober that and blah, 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 you better believe that Kentucky has the internet. You better believe they've got access to all this stuff. They know how good Brock Bowers is. They're going to try to stop him. So we said the job for Georgia on Saturday, the job for Mike Bobo, the offensive coordinator in particular, was you got to find a way to get the ball to Brock Bowers when the other side knows that, when the other side is trying to take him away. And that is exactly what Georgia did. So credit to Brock Bowers, who I think right now is very real, very legitimately in the conversation to not just be a Heisman finalist. I believe he is in the conversation to win the award. That's what Brocktober is all about. By the end of this month, Bowers can be not just kind of a cool, sort of a smart guy thing of like, if you really know football, you know how good Brock Bowers is. I want household names to know. I want casual fans to know. I want everybody to be aware of how good Brock Bowers is. And if he continues to play at this level, that is what is going to be. So Bowers, once again on Saturday, showed you absolutely how good of a player he is. But he doesn't have that kind of success against a defense keying to stop him unless Mike Bobo is also, as the folks like to say these days, kind of in his own bag as well. And Bobo was diabolical on Saturday in terms of how he was drawing up everything here for Georgia. He deserves a lot of credit for that. And knowing what I said on Friday in terms of, man, you got to find a way to get him the ball even when the other side knows you're trying to get him the ball. If I could have been told then what Mark Stoops was going to say after the game, I would have said that is exactly what I want to hear. This would be the exact proof I would need that Georgia absolutely was not just committed to getting the ball to Bowers, but strategic and creative enough to find a way to do that when a smart coaching staff was trying to take him away. I saw this quote. Mike Griffith had this in one of his stories at DawgNation.com in terms of what Mark Stoops said here about Brock Bowers and the Georgia offensive game plan from Mike Bobo. I compliment them with the way they were creating some plays. We all look and say, how in the world does a guy like Brock Bowers get so open, right? That's what you want to hear. That's what we would have said after the Orange Bowl game. How is Bowers so open? Kentucky game, once again, Mark Stoops says, people say, how in the world does a guy like Brock Bowers get so open? Well, some of it they're creating. They did a nice job, and they got us into some bad vision, meaning we didn't know what to look at because they got so much going on. Kirby Smart also said you credit the running game for this too. He said this in his post-game remarks, that you can't just zone up and kind of bracket Bowers, because if you do, all of a sudden you become a little bit vulnerable to giving up stuff through the run. But once again, that's Mike Bobo finding a way to play both left-handed and right-handed, finding a way to do both the run game and the passing game. Saturday was an emphatic answer from Mike Bobo to his critics. Now, maybe he's not paying as much attention to them as Carson Beck apparently was to those he felt like disrespected him. But if Bobo wanted to play the disrespect card on a day like this, you better believe he could do it, because clearly on Saturday he answered all of that and a whole lot more. And he found a way to get Brock Bowers involved once again. And I believe that right now, all of the talk and all of the hype, we love to do that anyway because we're kind of into that kind of thing. We're loudmouths. I am anyway, ringmaster, carnival barker type. I just enjoy that kind of thing. But just because I'm loud about it doesn't mean that it's not real. And just because I'm hyping it doesn't mean it isn't worthy of hype. Right now, Brock Bowers looks like the best player in college football. And Mike Bobo looks like an offensive coordinator who is quite capable and quite savvy in terms of how you use him. That's one of the things that made Saturday night so much fun to watch. And that is Around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella, Window and Door of Georgia. Now, before we're done, speaking of Brock Bowers, there was a weird way in which Brock Bowers kind of sort of bled into a recruiting storyline for Georgia on the weekend, and I'm going to not talk too much about this, but I do feel like we got to at least address it. So we'll do that before we're done today. Kind of a weird narrative around UGA recruiting, or at least a former UGA recruit. What he said about Brock Bowers, pretty strange on Saturday night. So we'll cover that before we are done on the program today. But for now, nothing but good stuff. Georgia absolutely dominant with its win over Kentucky, perhaps restoring order, at least for now. Long season, and humility is always a week away, but restoring order perhaps at least for now with the college football world. So let's react to everything that's going on after this Georgia win. We'll bring on a guy who I know enjoyed every minute of it. It's a Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with John Stinchcomb here today on DawgNation Daily.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So, John, I kind of find myself, and first of all, thank you for being with us here on the show. I kind of find myself repeating the same thing a lot when it comes to Brock Bowers. We like having fun with, making Brocktober and, stuff like that. We like, kind of just doing stuff like that. It's just sort of fun to have those little, storylines pop up during the year. But just because I have a little bit of an exaggerating personality doesn't mean that this is exaggerated. John, Brock Bowers really is the best player in college football. And Kentucky's a smart coaching staff. That's a good team. And with the entire world knowing how much Georgia right now is obviously going to feed Brock, just given the way that he's playing, they still couldn't stop him. And we're going to get to the Carson Beck part of this and the other components of the Georgia offense, which we're also kind of firing at a very high level, because that's all really important too. But this Bowers thing, it is real. It is happening. He is, to me right now, John, not just a candidate to be in New York. He is a candidate to win the trophy. I believe that Brock Bowers could absolutely win the Heisman Trophy this year. Do you agree?
I do, and here's why. In years past, Georgia's been built in a fashion that you could not just isolate one player, and it was to Georgia's strength. And I still think they're that way, but we have a unique talent. The fact that Brock is who he is, a great blocker, a great route runner, great catching the ball in contested small spaces, can run after the catch better than almost anyone in college football right now, running backs included, and has incredible speed, is smart enough to learn a playbook that features him at literally every weapon spot, every skilled position spot across the offense, which I don't think gets enough credit. Just to understand spacing and alignment, and then ability to create separation from the various positions that he plays. He is the featured player in an offense that is usually without a singular focal point. And this year, he is by far, hands down, the centric figure of this offense, and should be, because there just aren't a lot of Brock Bowers floating around this world, right? It's like Lamar Jackson when he came through. You know that even though he wasn't getting the pub that he probably deserved just because of where he was at, the skill set that he had was uniquely special, and that's who Brock is in today's college landscape.
And listen, I'm also a realist here. I understand that if some major quarterback starts having an incredibly dominant season, well, at that point in time, then a lot of the low-information Heisman voters are just going to gravitate towards that, and they'll kind of turn their attention away from a tight end because, honestly, a tight end does have a hard time winning this award. We haven't seen one win one since 1949. That's obviously some historical precedent that you at least have to consider in a discussion like this. But, John, I follow this sport very, very closely, and here's what I'm telling you. Right now, I don't see that quarterback out there that's just going to start, sucking everything into his gravitational orbit. You would say, well, Caleb Williams can do that. He won the award a year ago. But, John, their defense is terrible. And it's a defense that's going to – I'm not being funny. I'm being real. Their defense is terrible. They're going to lose some games. And I think at that point in time, we see a little bit of a bias against previous winners, rightly or not. We just sort of see that. I think eventually the bad nature of the USC defense, the fact they're not going to be a playoff contender, and the fact that he's already won the award is going to get folks shopping for somebody else. Quinn Ewers is somebody that I absolutely would have taken very seriously to win this award, and perhaps he's still a major contender. But Texas lost on Saturday to Oklahoma. I think you've got to look at that. We haven't really seen a real contender emerge yet from Ohio State. We may not. They're not quite as good on offense this year, at least it would seem. Michigan, to this point in time, has been content to play pretty slow. They're not really featuring anybody on offense. I watch the sport closely, and one of the things that has me really believing in Bauer's candidacy, he could be the best player, not win it, but this happens to be one of those years in which a guy like this being the best player probably gets proper consideration because there is no other guy out there who is obviously going to suck up a lot of the casual attention. It doesn't seem like that obvious candidate is necessarily emerging right now.
Yeah, I agree. For a tight end to win the award, let's take the Georgia allegiance out of this. For a tight end to win this award, one, he has to have an truly exceptional season. And two, there can't be a dominant statistical leader at the quarterback position, right? It can't be somebody. The Heisman Trophy has become who's got the best stats at those key positions, primarily quarterback. And right now, aside from, I would say, Penix in Washington is the guy that I would think is that front runner. Caleb Williams, because he won it last year, I do think that there's a bias against winning it twice. But, for folks that don't see a lot of football, it is really easy to just look at stat lines and say, ooh, he must be the best player. So it's going to be a battle that is going to be a little bit uphill for anybody that doesn't record stats every time they touch the ball, which is the quarterback. So it's a challenge. With that said, to overcome those challenges takes a unique talent, and that's exactly who Brock Bowers is.
I also spent some time before you joined us talking about Carson Beck, and John, he was just so impressive on Saturday, and he's been good this year. We've kind of said that for a while, that this is one of those things that Georgia fans, I think, collectively mostly got right, which is that, post-Auburn game, our post-game show, which can be a pretty tough crowd to please sometimes, just to be completely honest, as a lot of college football fan bases can be. I don't say that negatively. I'm just being, just being honest. They were very complimentary of Beck, as the phrase went, growing up at Auburn. And I think that Beck has been winning over this Georgia fan base a lot over the course of the first 5 games of the year. And then Saturday, he kind of put it all together for a Georgia offense that was really firing on all cylinders. Because the fun thing about Saturday was, Auburn game, it was sort of like Brock Bowers or you lose, right? I mean, like you had to have Bowers put the team on his back. Otherwise, you're talking about, a winning streak coming to an end. Well, Saturday it was Brock Bowers plus this and this and this and this. This was a fully operational battle station for Georgia on Saturday. Beck not just throwing to Bowers, but getting rah-rah involved, a guy that I really like right now. You saw the kind of the sort of twin killers at running back again with Milton now healthy and Dejon Edwards. Their yards per carry numbers were nice on Saturday. What did you like about the rest of the Georgia offense, in other words?
Yeah, I think this was a statement game for Georgia. It's also how we said Coach Bobo and Carson Beck are going to be evaluated. They're not going to be evaluated when it's against a much lesser opponent. They're going to be evaluated on how the offense performs in big games. This, at least on paper, going into the week, was a big game. It is an undefeated Kentucky team that's hungry, that looks dangerous, that was able to run wherever they wanted to across the field against Florida the week before, and they're a physical team. So this was the first quote-unquote test for Georgia. And by the middle of the second quarter, you recognize that we've got all the answers. We've got the cheat sheet to this test because Georgia is killing it. And that's how the quarterback, the offensive coordinator, that's how they should be and are evaluated, is how did you perform in big games? Carson Beck was on fire. And his biggest critique, as his body of work grows, has been, can he hit an open wide receiver for a big play? and he was hitting receivers everywhere across the field, with the exception of the one interception where, you get a little confidence. You're like, maybe I can fit it in this tight little window, and you go, well, this is, there is some reality to playing this position that can be humbling at times, that maybe there are some throws that you don't make or don't attempt. But aside from that, this was a statement game for Georgia's offense. This was a statement game for all the critics of Mike Bobo, and more importantly, this was a statement game for Carson Beck, for any naysayers that still exist that question whether or not Georgia has their next quarterback that follows Stetson Bennett. That case is closed. Carson Beck is your guy, and you should feel really good about who is has the controls of the offense when it's a combination of Mike Bobo and Carson Beck.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And just a quick follow-up to that, like the one thing we said after the South Carolina game is that Georgia just needs to score more points against SEC teams. And, that to me is always one of the more predictive stats, because that's what Georgia did so well for the previous, 3 years of, against what you kind of think of as on paper the tougher teams that you're playing. Georgia just very consistently put up pretty big scoring numbers in all those games, because that's what indicates your ability to really score when it matters later on in a kind of a postseason situation, is kind of what you're doing on kind of a per game basis in the SEC. And so that to me, John, is why Saturday was so valuable, because I think it does now show you what the ceiling for this team can be. Now, can you match this level of play for an entire season? You might not be able to, but it's still pretty important to establish your ceiling too. And 50 against Kentucky, that's the kind of offense that'll take you pretty deep into December and January, I believe.
Yeah, and we haven't seen that yet. This was the most complete performance from this Georgia football team that we've seen all year. It's not, the reason why they're ranked number one is because of their past two seasons. This was a statement of who we have in our locker room, the playmakers that we put on the field, the schemes that we run. They are effective. The reason why Georgia's ranked number one is because they should be the number one ranked team in the country. They have the players. They perform at a high level. When it matters most, they show up and take care of business in ways that no other team can. There's not a more complete team, and we could not have said that with a straight face or with complete confidence until we saw what we did on Saturday. I think this game against Kentucky, for anyone, and I'm included, and everyone really should be, like, we still need to see it. Well, we've seen it now.
Yep.
And now it's a matter of consistently in these big games, because you earn the opportunity to play in big games by winning the previous big games that you've played in. The more you play in them and you perform the way Georgia did, it just solidifies that claim that you're looking at the best of what college football has to offer.
No, I think that's exactly right. I want to talk about the other side of the ball here in a moment. Prior to that, let me remind folks, this is our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with John Stinchcomb here today. And if you have not yet become a member of the Marlowe's Tavern Insider Club, well, you need to. I'll tell you this. I had lunch at Marlowe's. I was at the Avalon location one day last week. It was phenomenal. I had the French dips sandwich for lunch. It was absolutely delicious. And I just think that's the kind of thing that you ought to be doing on a regular basis, right? And when you do that, when you enjoy the chef-inspired food, the craft cocktails, the things that has made Marlowe's Tavern famous and beloved by so many folks here in our DawgNation Daily audience, when you're doing that, why not get some great incentives for doing that? Because when you sign up to become a member of the Marlowe's Tavern Insider Club, free to join, by the way, you're going to get $10 off a $30 order at your local Marlowe's just for being a part of the Marlowe's Tavern Insider Club. And after that, you earn what we call qualified visits, which means you go and you spend at least $15 in food or beverage. And when you get 4 of those qualified visits, well, after that, you're going to earn a complimentary entree for up to $20 that can be used on your next visit. And you get free incentives on your birthday and things like that. Just really, really fun stuff, and it's free to join. So become a member of the Marlowe's Tavern Insider Club online at marlowestavern.com today. All right, John, let's flip the side of the ball here and look at the defense here for a moment, because, statistically, this side of the ball looks really good. Now, early game, Ray Davis had a couple of successful runs, and maybe there was this thought of, here we go again, perhaps Georgia's going to be vulnerable, and yet Georgia really bowed its back, prevented that from being an issue. Kirby Smart after the game said, maybe I saw a couple of things that I didn't love, but Kirby was also pretty calm after last week, saying go back and look at what Georgia did against Auburn. Not quite as, I think he said, state of depression, not quite as depressed as he was initially, that things actually weren't all that bad maybe, and maybe the building blocks were in place, and Georgia goes out and plays a pretty complete game. What did you make of the defense in particular and what it was able to do against a Kentucky team that had some offensive success coming into Saturday night?
Yeah, full overall performance. You see what it should be, right? I mean, you see Georgia was able to suffocate a running offense, a rush offense that dominated previous opponents, Florida included the week prior. And there were times where you're going, ooh, there's an open wide receiver behind our cornerbacks. I'm glad he missed that throw. And that happened a couple of times throughout the game. And Davis did have a couple of runs. But the body of work that Georgia's defense did was convincing, and that's reflected in the score. When it mattered most, they show up and they played, and that's like offensive line play. Defenses are evaluated similarly. It's consistency. Can you consistently shut down your opponent? And that's what Georgia did. You look at some of the plays that happened. Obviously, that Warren Brinson roughing the passer was total garbage. But just overall, we don't have that one player. We don't have the Brock Bowers on the defensive side. We don't have a Jalen Carter out there. We don't have the trust that Nolan Smith and Robert Beals Jr. earned over their body of work at that outside linebacker position for some of the containment things that we don't have that quite yet. But they are playing really good football, and that you see flashes from some of these younger guys of what could be and what's developing as this season goes on, similar to what we saw from younger guys last season, specifically offensively, where you're going, oof, as they develop throughout the season, this is going to be exciting. I see the same things from young defensive players that you're getting flashes of it, and they're earning more opportunities to be on the field and contribute in meaningful ways. As much as Georgia rotates players, specifically in the box, that matters. And they're earning reps, they're earning opportunities, and are doing so in convincing fashion. Is there still things that you'd like to see? Absolutely. Yeah, I'd like to see pass rush that's not generated by 5- and 6-man pressures, right? But the overall body of work, the consistency of stopping the run, putting Kentucky in difficult positions where it's 3rd and long and 2nd and long situations because of early success, that's convincing to me. There is reason to believe that in these big games against a talented offense that Georgia can step up and perform at a very high level.
Let me just also follow up on that with one final thing, too. The one name specifically I want to mention after Saturday's game on the defensive side of the ball is linebacker Jamon Dumas-Johnson. And, John, he's a guy that's really been in the crosshairs for a lot of Georgia fans. A lot of Georgia fans have kind of felt that Dumas-Johnson has not had the kind of year this year thus far that they expected him to have. Smart mentioned a health issue for him. Perhaps that helps explain it, if it's even true. Sometimes these kinds of things become narrative without necessarily the evidence to support the discussion that's taking place. But whether it was true, wasn't true, whether the discussion was fair or not, looked to me that Jamon Dumas-Johnson had himself a very good game on Saturday. Had a sack and a half. Very active, I thought. What did you make of the Jamon Dumas-Johnson performance? And I guess how aware were you of some of the criticism out there? How fair did you perhaps think that it was? And how nice was it to also see, no matter what the truth of the matter was, is that Dumas-Johnson really offered a strong response to any of that, to me anyway, by the way that he played on Saturday.
Yeah, I think this game was set up for him. I think he's a little bit of a throwback in linebacker play because he's more physical. He's more downhill. He's more of a box-controlling, power-based player, which is a throwback to yesteryear. I mean, most linebackers today are safeties that can run and cover, and they're sideline to sideline, and then can step up and fill a hole if need be. But that certainly isn't their forte. Pop, if you will, I think I'm not in that locker room. I can't speak with certainty, but I certainly think he has the respect of his teammates and is seen as a leader on that side of the ball, which matters. It certainly matters to the guys that surround him. They believe in him, and the way Kentucky plays ball set up for, we need a guy like Pop. We need him to be able to fill those gaps and not be. We knew Kentucky was going to play a physical style of football, and having a guy like Jamon in the middle set the tone. I see the results of that based on Saturday that, man, he made a big difference. And he would be the first to tell you. He hasn't played at the level that he's wanted to as a complete body of work this season, whether it's injury-related or not. You're expected to perform at a high level if you're going to be out there. That's just the expectation of Georgia football and the standard that's been set. So he had a big game and has earned that, and it was set up in a way where it's almost expected. I expect him in those physical, we got to stop the run. They're going to try to lean on folks. Well, that's right up his alley, and he answered that bell and did so with exceptional fashion.
John, great stuff. We appreciate your insight as a part of a Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update today. Thank you so much. Fun to be talking about a big, strong Georgia performance, and also fun to consider where this team perhaps can go from here. And we'll look forward to talking to you about all of that once again next week.
Enjoy it, BA. Go Dogs.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, obviously the challenge now for Georgia is finding a way to maintain this, or at least playing as close to what we kind of thought was, sort of a top-end style performance, as close as possible the rest of the season. And, clearly there's some challenges out there. Some of that we're going to get to here coming up in just a moment. But nice to see Georgia showing you at least how good that it can be, because as John, I think, correctly pointed out, that's the one thing we had not really seen yet this year. We just had not seen that kind of top-end performance from UGA, which makes first 5-6 games of the 2023 season very, very different than what the first, handful of games of the 2022 season had been, because Georgia played a high-profile game against Oregon, a road game against South Carolina. They flexed then, and as you've heard us say, once you kind of flex early in the year, when you kind of go into a cave after that, well, people still have the perception of, well, Georgia is obviously as good as it wants to be because we've seen what they can do. They just, for whatever reason, didn't play that way on Saturday. But until you have seen that, what you are left to wonder, well, how good can this team be really? Well, Saturday was kind of an emphatic response to that question, we believe, and fun to watch how the next 6 games of the regular season kind of play out now based on what Georgia did in kind of a spotlight game against Kentucky on Saturday night. Now, with that in mind, we'll get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I am proud to say, at least I am excited. I'm in anticipation of what sounds like there could be a little chatter about the possibility that perhaps BA will be able to go, if you don't mind me going third person for a second, on an early voyage for Icon of the Seas. Many of you know this. Icon of the Seas debuts January of 2024. Largest cruise ship ever constructed. It's going to be an unbelievable experience, kind of taking what Royal Caribbean's already done at an amazing level and putting it at an even higher level going forward. Brand new concepts, restaurant-wise, bar and lounge-wise. Just the design of the ship is going to be a little bit different. Some of this is almost hard for me to imagine. I'm dying to see it. And there's some chatter out there that I might be able to get a chance to see it. So I'll tell you more about that as it becomes available, as details become available. I know that's as important to you all as it is for me, my hopes of going on Icon of the Seas. So we'll tell you about that. But for now, you can do it. Whether I make it on board or not, you can be there. Our friend Jessica Slater, terrific travel agent, specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean. She can help you do it. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. Once again, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She can get you set up and ready to go for a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacations. We head towards this holiday time of year or early 2024. She's got you covered on all of that. Now, with that said, let's go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of a Royal Caribbean. Most significant outcome in the SEC on Saturday, arguably may have been Alabama going on the road and beating Texas A&M. Now, there is something to be said about the Alabama side of this, and obviously we'll get there. But to me, the big takeaway here is the ultimate failure of A&M to win a game like this that seemed to be as set up for them as it's ever going to be against this particular opponent in its own stadium. Now, obviously, A&M's beaten Alabama before, but the stakes of this win would have been so much greater. It would have made A&M a legitimate SEC West contender, and it would have given Jimbo Fisher the cachet of potentially saying that he was the coach that toppled Nick Saban sort of fully, finally, and completely. Because if Alabama loses a second game on the first Saturday in October, there's kind of no coming back from that, you probably think anyway. At least it would be very difficult to come back from that. And it certainly would have been a blow to the perception of Alabama. So this was the biggest game that Jimbo Fisher had ever coached at Texas A&M, and he coached the game like a coward. I just don't know how you can say it other than that. When you look at a situation, it's 17-17, about midway through the third quarter of this game. Your stadium's rocking. Your defense is playing pretty well. You've got a chance to win. And A&M had been playing good football. With the exception of the loss to Miami, A&M's been playing some pretty good football here this season. And you run the ball on 3rd and 2, you don't get it. So now you're setting up a 4th and 1, and you choose to punt it like, you're technically near midfield, but you're actually on their side of the field, right? You are on, in Alabama territory, if you will, here, marching towards what could be potentially a score. And you choose to punt it right there on a 4th and 1 situation. And after the game, the explanation for Fisher does him no favor, saying, well, if it had been 4th and less than a yard, we probably would have gone for it. You think? Would you have? I mean, this is just one of those things of, for a guy who the knock on him the entire time he's been there is his conservative tendencies, his careful tendencies, his, sort of plodding, old-school tendencies have just held back Texas A&M. It's the reason that Bobby Petrino is here at College Station, because Jimbo Fisher just hasn't been willing to embrace certain kind of aggressive offensive tactics that would give his team the best chance to win. And once again on Saturday, another example of that even after hiring Petrino and doing all this kind of stuff, once again, Fisher kind of betrayed here by his own instincts. And this is the game that I think is going to stick with him for a long time. When the ultimate story is kind of told of what I believe is going to end up being one of the biggest financial failures in recent college football history, the money ultimately spent on Fisher and will eventually be spent on buying him out, and the lack of results that come from that investment, when all that story is told, I believe a very significant part of that will be this particular game right here. When he had a chance to win, when he had a chance to make the sort of bold strokes required of brave head coaches to give his team the chance, even though that the point spread was actually fairly narrow, and for the most part, this was kind of on paper a relatively even game between relatively evenly matched teams. Perception-wise, A&M was a huge underdog. This is one of those things where the stats and the player personnel and all of that doesn't perhaps tell the full story of exactly what was going on with A&M and Alabama. And the fact that A&M played them close last year in Tuscaloosa doesn't change that. The fact that A&M beat them in 2021 doesn't change that. Perception-wise, this was A&M trying to topple a giant. And you don't topple a giant by punting on their side of the field in the third quarter in a tie game. Bama gets the football, marches down, takes the lead, and never looks back. A lot of Alabama fans are going to try to spin this as, oh, they had us dead and buried, but look, we're back. This is not a story about Alabama. This is a story about Texas A&M. And we're going to get to the Texas-Oklahoma thing in a minute. Those teams are coming into the SEC next year. And there are a lot of programs they're going to be forced to consider. Do we have the right coach, knowing that our last easy day was yesterday and that this league's about to get so much tougher? One of the teams that should be asking that question, no matter how expensive the buyout is Texas A&M. Fisher betrayed the Aggies on Saturday. Now, on the Alabama side of this, for a quick moment, obviously Bama has kind of restored its own sense of balance in the SEC West. Is this a great football team? I don't believe so. Is this a team in keeping with the typical teams that Nick Saban's had at Alabama, even the last couple of teams that have fell short of expectations? I don't believe that's the case either. But they do have an inside track now to be 11-1 at the end of the year, to win the SEC West in the final year divisional play, and to give us Georgia and Alabama for like one more time as an East winner and a West winner at the SEC championship. So I don't know how good Alabama is right now. I do suspect, as I've been saying, this is a program that slipped. But I do think that Alabama's win on Saturday makes the SEC championship feel bigger potentially now. Now, there's still things that can happen in the SEC West. Jaden Daniels is certainly good enough that, he could potentially, pull the upset against Alabama and throw the league back into chaos. I guess that's a possibility. But Alabama's road win has probably restored a sense of balance there, you got to think. And if that does continue towards December, then the SEC championship will feel bigger. If it is a 12-0 Georgia against an 11-1 Alabama, that's going to feel like a pretty big game, and that may be the end result of Alabama's road win there at Texas A&M. Staying in the state for a moment and going to the Red River Shootout won by Oklahoma on Saturday. By the way, we kind of called this. We said that we feel like Texas is a playoff team, and honestly, my overall opinion of Texas has not changed very much by the loss to Oklahoma. I still feel like the Texas is among the very best teams in the country, but we did say Oklahoma, one of the benefits that it has going into that game was they played a relatively soft schedule, which gives them more of a chance to, kind of be ready for a game like this and kind of put everything into a game like that, especially the extra motivation that probably comes knowing that Texas embarrassed Oklahoma last season. The biggest win for Brent Venables thus far as the Oklahoma coach, and it's perhaps not even close. It's definitely not even close. And for Dylan Gabriel, who I think we've been kind of suggesting, eventually you got to replace him. You got to go to Jackson Arnold at quarterback. I mean, Dylan Gabriel made a big sort of case for himself on Saturday there as well. This is a much improved Oklahoma team. There were a lot of moments last year with Venables in his first year as the Oklahoma coach that to me made him sort of look like he's not really fit for all this right now, not really capable of what that job required, especially in light of losing Lincoln Riley. And all of a sudden now the vibe around that's completely different. That when you think about what's coming into the SEC next year, it's not just Texas, it's Oklahoma there as well. And listen, for a long time, those of us who are very pro-SEC homer types, we've kind of turned our nose up on certain aspects of Big 12-style football. What I saw on Saturday in Dallas wasn't really that, though. I saw a Texas team and an Oklahoma team that both look like pretty tough outs in the SEC next year. They are coming, and they are, to a certain extent, changing the landscape of this league. This is a very good football game. And I guess you got to probably ask the question here. Okay, so Oklahoma wins on a neutral against Texas here. Now, keep in mind that the Big 12 title game is just the two teams that have the best record in the league, which right now would stand to be Texas and Oklahoma in a rematch. What do you do if, both teams end up 12-1 with a win against each other on a neutral field? How do you separate that? So let's say Oklahoma wins, and obviously there's a lot of football still left to be decided here. But if Oklahoma wins Saturday, neutral field, Texas wins the Big 12 title game, they're the Big 12 champ, but it wouldn't be right to give them too much deference for that, knowing all they really did was just win a different neutral site game from the one that Oklahoma had won earlier in the year. Is there a possibility in this kind of final year of this version of the Big 12? The Big 12 could be in play for two playoff teams? I don't know if Oklahoma's quite good enough to be in that discussion. Perhaps Texas maybe more so, but we have some very interesting playoff stuff to sift through here, and the possibility of a rematch between two teams that both look to be among the nation's best on Saturday is probably something worth considering there. And I'll make one final point about this game too, which is one of the interesting wars of words that's been going on around college football now is how Oklahoma fans feel about Lincoln Riley. Mad at him for the way in which he left. And by the way, Riley's decision to run scared from the SEC has never looked wiser than it perhaps does right now. He is just not a coach that would fit into this league at all. They don't play any defense whatsoever. His Oklahoma teams didn't. His USC teams don't. USC won a game on Saturday night in overtime, but frankly, I think they ought to feel pretty embarrassed by it against Arizona. Averages grits Arizona, if not worse than that, mediocre, worse than that. And USC just can't stop anybody. They just can't. Caleb Williams is very good. Probably a very deserving number 1 overall pick, I think anyway. But USC just can't stop anybody. And there's a chance that it seemed like last year, because Williams wins the Heisman Trophy and Riley has a relatively successful first year, that it sort of seemed like Riley was getting last laugh against Oklahoma after he left Oklahoma. But the world turns pretty fast in college football, and perhaps Oklahoma eventually gets its own reason to laugh at Lincoln Riley, because right now USC does not have the look of a top-flight team, despite the fact they're still undefeated. And I would say Oklahoma very much does. Now, one final point here. For all the coaching talk of, well, this guy hurt his team and that guy did whatever else, I don't know that any coach in the history of college football has hurt his team worse than what Mario Cristobal did for Miami Saturday night against Georgia Tech. Now, we say this all the time, but it bears repeating here once again. College football is just the strangest sport there is, and this is why we all love it so much. Last week, 8 days ago, Georgia Tech was losing by double digits. They lost by double digits to Bowling Green. And then they go on the road and win outright as a 3-touchdown underdog at Miami. A Miami team that had been playing well. They'd beaten Texas A&M. This is a team that had been playing well. And the end result is, when we were leaving the postgame show, I was telling our on-site producer, I was like, I got to try to figure out what happened in this Miami-Georgia Tech game, because it was obvious that something crazy had happened, but it wasn't obvious, at least when you're trying to scroll and sort of see what people are saying. It wasn't obvious exactly what that was, and you find out with 30-something seconds to go, with the opportunity to take a knee and run out the clock, Miami chooses Mario Cristobal, the head coach, allows a rushing play to be called. Should never have happened. Should have taken a knee. Tim Hasselback, the game analyst, was calling this out in the moment about how idiotic and dumb that it was. Fumble occurs. Tech then scores. And by the way, Haynes King, listen, we're not Georgia Tech fans obviously here. How many SEC teams right now would Haynes King start for? You got to think the answer is a few. You got to, don't you? Auburn, Florida, at least. I think Haynes King right now would be starting for a handful of SEC teams. Missouri's doing well. I believe Haynes King would probably be starting for Missouri too, though. He's having a pretty good year for Tech. Leads them on a scoring drive. Miami loses one of the most embarrassing games anyone's ever lost. What makes it worse is apparently Cristobal had the same thing happen for him as Oregon coach back in 2018 when they're playing Stanford. Once again, choosing not to take a knee and down the ball. Just horrid, terrible clock management. Miami fans are beside themselves, and you would think they have a reason to be. This was perhaps the most talked about moment of the weekend. Certainly on late Saturday night, it's all anybody was talking about. What a disaster, and we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And that also kind of leads us into our final topic on our show today, because fresh off of the embarrassing Saturday night loss, perhaps Cristobal playing the card that sometimes coaches do, which is find a way to get some good news on the heels of some epic bad news. Nye Carr, the former Georgia wide receiver, commits to Miami, fresh off recently decommitting from Georgia. Now, let me be very candid here just for a moment. There is one thing I am very old-fashioned about, probably more old-fashioned than maybe I should be. We don't talk bad about recruits. We just don't. You can go to Georgia. You can go to wherever. We just don't do that because I am 40-something years old, and I am just not going to talk bad about a kid. And for a long time, that has sort of made a lot of sense because, I am an adult professional. These are unpaid amateurs. Well, now in the NIL age, especially in the case of this particular recruit, Nye Carr, the idea of being an unpaid amateur is probably a romantic notion at best, given the way all of this seems to be playing out here right now. And yet, for me, old habits kind of die hard. I'm just going to be very careful about being critical of any player who's a recruit because of the age gap between me and them. It just seems like a very weird thing to do. But there was a tweet, many of you have seen this. It has been deleted by Nye Carr. And while I am not going to use this as fodder to criticize him personally or criticize him in particular, I do think it's instructive of how we who care about Georgia football should sort of view certain situations around this team. We talked, and we have been talking, this is the month of Brocktober. And by the way, it's kind of fun to see people kind of getting on board with the whole Brocktober idea now. That's really fun. We think that Brock Bowers is best player in college football. He proved that once again there on Saturday. It would seem like when you see a player like that, a playmaker who is being utilized to his fullest potential by an offensive coordinator like Mike Bobo, it seems like any young football player would perhaps want to be a part of that and want to have a chance to be used that way. Whether or not you want to go to Georgia or not, it seems like almost any football player would be inspired by the kind of success a guy like Bowers is having because, Bowers is going to be a top 5 pick. He may be number 2 overall. He's not going to be drafted number 1 overall. That's going to be a quarterback. But anything after that, I believe, is in play for Brock Bowers. This is a special football player, and you would think anyone who spends time watching football would recognize that. Well, on Saturday night, in a tweet that's been deleted, so perhaps cooler heads prevailing, Nye Carr, who's now committed to Miami. Let me show you what was put out there on Twitter. This was widely shared. And it's hard to understand exactly what he means by this, but he says 100 times to a tight end is crazy. Why would I do that? I play wide receiver. He then deleted this. And I'm not going to use this as fodder for criticizing Carr. Honestly, I wish him well. That's fine. I think he's a really good player. I think he's got a very bright future, and we've said many times we wish that was at Georgia. So we're not going to change our tune on that necessarily. Carr is the kind of guy you'd like to have at UGA. But Georgia is Georgia because of the connection piece that exists here. Kirby Smart talked about that again on Saturday. He said something to the effect of, y'all may not think this is real, or people may not understand this is real, but we just feel more connected. And if you have a player that could come to Georgia and he views the success that Brock Bowers is having as some sort of negative because as Bowers does what he's doing, that's less touches that would go for him, then without being critical of the player in particular, I just think it's fair to say that player is just better off somewhere else. And I say this as someone who desperately wants Georgia to kind of step up and win with the elite wide receivers in a way that it hasn't done here thus far. But there's no free lunch in life. You can't have everything all at once. And you do have to have players that sometimes recognize, hey, while I personally want to be great, I am in the midst of someone else who's actually achieving greatness. And sometimes that greatness creates an opportunity for me, but at other times I'm going to stand back and appreciate what's happening before my eyes. And that's the kind of season that Brock Bowers is having. That's the kind of career that Brock Bowers is having. So I hate to see Nye Carr leave, but if this is his feeling about Brock Bowers, or if this is what his perception would be of playing with Brock Bowers, then leaving is the right place for him to go. But I hope the money that Miami allegedly is going to give him is worth it and spends well, because to be the positive spin on the embarrassing loss they had on Saturday night, ooh, boy, be careful what you're doing if you get involved with that. So just a quick final point there on that. We wish him well. We don't have bad words to say about him, but pretty clearly Georgia's got a certain kind of player that it's looking for, and perhaps that might not be the best fit here at a place like UGA. And with that said, we'll go ahead and wrap up today's program. And we have got a lot of golden shoes. As you would imagine, almost all of these are Brocktober themed, and you love that. So let's throw the first one up here for today. How about this? In keeping with the tradition of apparel that kind of based on some of the stuff from our show, Allie Moody Powell, you love this. Hashtag welcome to Brocktober at DawgNation Daily. She has the Brocktober sweatshirt made up. How much do you love that from Allie? Having a good time. You love nothing more than the wonderful, wonderful all-day tailgate there in Athens. Allie having a good time doing that. Good-looking Brocktober T-shirt there. She's having a good time with that. Allie, we will give you a well-deserved golden shoe for that, spreading the good news about Brocktober. Our buddy Mad Dog also checks in. He wins a golden shoe there as well, saying a quick reminder of what Georgia does to Mark Stoops. That's right, Kirby Smart, give him a real paddling. You love that from Mad Dog. Funny as always. Another golden shoe going out here. Brian Whitehead to write in to say, thanks for using my daughter's picture on DawgNation. So the Whitehead children make their It's Brocktober in Athens sign, number 19. DawgNation picked that up, took a picture of them. So Brian has a good time with that. Once again, it's a wonderful picture. And anybody right now using that Brocktober hashtag or the Brocktober, any kind of Brocktober imagery is going to give you an easy golden shoe and probably get you featured in DawgNation there as well. Brian, you love to see that. Well-earned golden shoe going out to your daughters for their really, really fun Brocktober sign. Another golden shoe now. Even the official Georgia account gave you the Brocktober tweet on Saturday. Rob Smith shared that with me. You'll love to see that. And I also showed this. How much do you love the Brock Bowers flex on his touchdown on Saturday? Brock's a pretty mild-mannered guy, but even he's kind of feeling it right now, as he probably should. Brock, perhaps in the spirit of Brocktober, as much as anybody else possibly could be. Then one more for today. Popeye writes in to give you a little Brocktoberfest beer. I love it, man. I love it. Everybody having a good time with Brocktober right now. Brock Bowers propelling Georgia. Clearly the number one team in the country. We think Bowers is clearly the best player in the country. Life is good around DawgNation today, and some great golden shoes to celebrate all of that. Now, finally, Gator Hater Countdown. Florida gets a win against measly Vanderbilt on Saturday, but it is just the calm before the storm for them, because bad things are happening 19 days from right now. That is our Gator Hater Countdown, because the team that beat Florida just lost by darn near 50 to Georgia, That is bad news to be a lousy, stinking Gator. We will see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella, window and door of Georgia. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. For a while, things were going just so well. And I think the show itself is fine. But for a while, we were just pacing right on, and then slowly somewhere around the hour mark, we kind of lost the pace there a little bit. We ended up kind of going about an hour 10, which, as I joked last week, maybe the show is just an hour and 10 minutes long now. Maybe that's just normal time. At a certain point in time, when you're X number of minutes over long enough, you have to sort of maybe recalibrate what normal is. So maybe we're just an hour and 10 minutes long now. Perhaps that's the case. Either way, we've got your comments coming now as a part of our First and 15 in DawgNation.com and on the DawgNation app, YouTube, Facebook, everything else. Let's see what else. Good to see Green Soldier in here today. Feels like we haven't seen Green Soldiers much. He called us on our show on Saturday, but we haven't seen him live here in our comment section, so we'll see. Let's see what else. Nature Gator says that I had said that Florida fans won't show up in Jacksonville. Nature Gator says we'll see about that. Yeah, I don't know how many will be there to begin the game, but I have a decent idea about how many will be there. Midway third quarter, I have a decent idea about how many will be there then. John Main calling out people for not giving enough likes. So, John, here's what I'll tell you. I am very bad at almost anything like that where, we don't do, as much of a carnival barker as I am, I don't do a ton of promotion about, likes and sharing and things like that. I should probably do more of that. My belief is, we don't really play the algorithm game very much, and I'm not saying that's the right thing or wrong thing. I'm probably pretty sure it's probably a wrong thing. I don't really ask people for podcast reviews. I don't really ask people for YouTube likes. I probably should. I've always just sort of been of the belief of, hey, if we do a good show, people will come here, they'll seek us out, and they'll find it. We've never really played what you call the algorithm game very much. And we probably should do it more because, honestly, we need all the help we can get, of course. But we've never really done as much of that as we possibly should. So y'all, since you're better at doing this than I am, y'all do as John said. Was it John that said that? Yeah, y'all do as John said. Give us some likes. John's calling y'all out. So there you go. Maybe we'll start doing more of that kind of thing. I've never been one to ask for that kind of stuff very much, but as has been said before, you have not because you ask not. that may be the story of my life in some respects. Ron John brings up the rah-rah revolution. I said this a lot last week. I'm going to say it again because obviously you have more reason to say this. I really like Rah-Rah Thomas. I do. I don't know what I thought Rah-Rah was coming here, but oh boy, he is way better than I realized. Way better than I realized. And so I mentioned this to our First and 15 audience a little earlier that I wanted to mention Rah-Rah more on today's show. But the truth is, the point I want to make about Rah-Rah is big enough that I feel like I want to save it a little bit because on a show like this where you got to do maybe not any one thing too much, it just sort of makes sense to kind of save a bigger topic for a little bit later on in the week. And I believe there's a bigger conversation to be had about Rah-Rah Thomas because right now Rah-Rah has the look of someone that Georgia may really find a way to use here. Let's see. Green Soldier says Rah-Rah once he gets the playbook and he'll be that guy. Yeah, I think so. And, obviously what Rah-Rah was doing at Mississippi State is very, very different. Many of you are aware of just how different that Mike Leach offense is to almost any other offense, including the one, by the way, Mississippi State's running right now. Just very, very different offensively. So you're asking guys to do something very different when they come to a place like this. And, I don't know. I don't know that I need him to know the full playbook. I need him to know enough to get by the next, 9 games. And I would maybe be okay with a little bit of, not to say that he's not, obviously, capable of learning the entire thing. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that for a guy who's been here less than other guys have been and less experience in an offense like this, I might be okay with just saying, hey, I know this is really different than what you did before, so just run to this spot or do this, read this and either do this or do that. Like, I'd be okay with sort of giving him sort of a simplified set of rules if that's what he needs, having only been here now for less than a year. Obviously, he spent a lot of his football life doing some different kind of stuff. I would almost be okay with that. Darian Ford says that Ra is a faster A.D. Mitchell. I was thinking about this, Darian, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to say this or not, because I really like A.D. Mitchell a lot. And, I was one of the ones kind of defending A.D. when he left here of, hey, if he wants to leave, I obviously can't imprison him. I can't keep him here, but he'll always kind of have DGD status for me. That's what I said about A.D. Mitchell, and I do believe that. So I'm very pro A.D. Mitchell in a way that I'm not pro everyone who's left to Georgia. I'm very pro A.D. Mitchell. But based on what I'm saying right now, do I believe that Ra Thomas can be every bit as good as A.D. Mitchell was for Georgia? And A.D. Mitchell was a hero. Ohio State game, Alabama game. These are legendary status oil painting style games. And A.D. Mitchell was massive in both those games. Do I think that Ra can be that good for Georgia based on what I'm seeing right now? I do. I think I do. And I was going to bring that up, but I was thinking it. And since you brought it up, I guess I'll walk through the door that you opened yourself. Yeah, I think that Ra Thomas could be Georgia's new A.D. Mitchell. I do. Spencer says that A.D.'s value is in the red zone. I totally agree. And it's not easy to score in the red zone. And A.D. became a big, hero for Georgia in some of his, big game touchdown situations. I think Ra can do that. Pizza Man says A.D. made big plays in our most important games. He's a legend. Yeah, I don't disagree with that either. But could you see Ra having a go-ahead catch in a national championship game? Touchdown catch like that? I could see him doing that. Waylon Wilson says, I think this team is going to turn out to be better than the 2022 team in the end. Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you have a really strong positive data point, it kind of brings a lot of that stuff back into your mind again. For me, it's still too early to know. I just don't know. Here's what I'll tell you. Your level of dominance in SEC games, to me, is a fairly predictive marker for what you can do in the postseason. And the one thing we kind of pointed out post-South Carolina was this team's just got to score more points. They've just got to score more points. And if you want to go back to the last year that Georgia did not score at least 30 points per game against SEC competition, that's 2019. So that year, Georgia had like the one big game where they figured it all out offensively. That was against Tennessee. It was on the road. That was an 8-5 Tennessee team. That's a pretty good game from Georgia. But it was the only game against SEC teams that year that Georgia really played that way. Now, obviously, I don't expect this Kentucky game to be the only game this year in which Georgia does that. But my point is you do have an example in the past of the top-end performance didn't quite get matched and didn't quite get reached again. You do have an example of that. So let's watch what happens in future games, and let's watch in 6 more regular season games, can Georgia touch this level like 2 more times, right? Can it win its remaining games? And while winning its remaining games, can it touch this level like 2 more times? If it can do that, then I think that your potential prediction is on track to be true. I really do. But in terms of kind of getting back to that, oh my gosh, Georgia's going to dominate, I'd like to see this level matched again. And then at that point in time, I think that becomes a conversation you can certainly have. Army Dog Charlie, who, by the way, had a legendary tailgate on Saturday and also made time to come by and see us at the UGA bookstore, which I appreciate, says we're averaging 40.6 points per game. Dang. Yeah, you love that. You love that right now. Let's see what else. I got to go to Facebook. I've been on YouTube here for a minute. Let me go to Facebook, and we'll see how people are doing over there. On the Facebook side of things for today. Boy, fun to be doing a show after a nice win. Really good to be doing that. All right. Barry Watkins says, I like to think of it as a puzzle, and the pieces are coming close to completion. I like that analogy, Barry, because to me, like Brock Bowers, gigantic piece. Carson Beck, gigantic piece. But you start putting the other pieces around that. Dejon Edwards, significant piece. Kendall Milton, the way he played on Saturday, significant piece. Ra Thomas, significant piece. Marcus Rosemead-Jacksaint, significant piece. Second tight end, Oscar Delp had a touchdown. Pretty sizable piece. Better game from the offensive line, significant piece. Defensively, even after some issues, here's the one thing. Now, y'all, some of this stuff hides in plain sight. So through 6 games, most of the season has been the kind of, Georgia's kind of on defense, Auburn seemed like a little bit of a concern because you gave up so many rushing yards. But South Carolina game, especially second half, Kentucky game against Leary, this team, when it's really needed to, the one thing that's just like last year, they are getting after the quarterback when they really need to. That's what they did a year ago. They didn't do it against so-and-so State University, but when they're playing Tennessee or teams like that, they found a way to get after quarterbacks. They made Leary's life a living you-know-what on Saturday. They were all over Rattler, especially in the second half, a couple of weeks prior to that. There's a little bit of a through line for Georgia's defensive performances, which is, hey, the overall pass rush on kind of a per-play and a per-game basis may not be as high as it was in 2021. Boy, when they need to, somehow magically they find their way to the quarterback. Isn't that kind of funny? It's like, they don't always do that, and sometimes they kind of shrug it off. Kirby sometimes sort of shrugs it off. But magically, give them a ranked SEC team, give them a night game on ESPN, magically, all of a sudden, quarterbacks coming to the ground. It's kind of funny how that works out. I don't know. Kind of funny. Ulysses Dunnings, which is an amazing name, says the defense showed up and showed out. You better believe that's the case. Absolutely did. Ryan Walker checks in. George Herndon would like to see Lassiter and Jamon Dumas-Johnson both meeting at the quarterback. That's good to see. Jamie Huff and Ryan Walker talking about two guys that I think have earned some positive praise. Chaz Chambliss seems like he had a very good game, and Jamon Dumas-Johnson seems like he had a very good game. But Ryan also, he joins us a lot on our DawgNation post-game show. He's been pretty pointed in some of his criticism of Pop there on that. A lot of Georgia fans, I think, have agreed. We've kind of noticed some of that. So perhaps you do want to see that continue for both those guys, but gosh, you can't do it for the rest of the season. Do you do it in a game like this, and now you can kind of build on that. So I think that's probably pretty positive, right? Sandy Price says, it's great that we finally played a complete game. Yeah, it's just satisfying, right? I mean, there is something, and this is that feeling we've had so much the last couple of years. There is just something thoroughly satisfying about watching Georgia play this way. And maybe it's a harbinger for another national championship, or maybe it's not. Honestly, the rest of the season is still just as difficult to predict as it ever was, right? I mean, you certainly would have reason to believe that there's a higher possibility for greatness because you've seen that achieved on an individual game basis like this. But even with Georgia playing the way that it did, it doesn't solidify your predictions about anything else the rest of the season. But there's almost an aspect of Saturday night that's kind of not really about that. This is our main source of entertainment for many of us. Our main source of entertainment is college football. And on a big night game, whether you're going to the game or watching it on television, especially goodness knows given how bad the Braves played, like to be able to tune in, watch your favorite football team, go out there, and to quote The Rock, just layeth the smacketh down like that. Like, that's just fun to watch. It's just fun to watch. So whether it results in, what we want, go for 3-23 or not, it's just fun to watch that. That's just fun to watch. Ryan Walker always also gives us great comparisons. Oh, I like this one. He says that Ra is Georgia's version of Andre Reed. I like that. Former Buffalo Bill, of course. Physical blocker, strong hand, solid route runner, and makes big plays. And Ryan, what I'll add to that is, I have this perception of the Mike Leach wide receivers, what they are, with the exception of what Michael Crabtree was. He's kind of the different mold on that. But I have a little bit of a perception of sort of the Mike Leach-style wide receiver, and I thought that's kind of what Ra Thomas was too. Like the first time I saw him, kind of field level, standing flat ground, looking at him on flat ground, close up. This is a guy that immediately had the look, the size, we saw him go up and high point that football on Saturday. This is a guy who's got that look, like you said, the sort of physical specs to be physical. You can just sort of look at him and tell. It's like he should have been in Georgia the whole time. He just looks like a Georgia wide receiver. So I agree with you on that. Miriam Corbin also pointing out Peyton Woodring on the list of things that were really good for Saturday. We addressed this on our postgame show. We'll say it here now as well. Woodring has now made at least 5 in a row, made 3 on Saturday. And, boy, you love that. I mean, I've joked about this before. So my daughter is in the 3rd grade right now. The last time that Georgia had a place kicker other than Podlesny or Rodrigo Blankenship, she was a baby. She couldn't speak. She was a baby. Georgia's had 2 kickers for the entirety of her life, and she's in 3rd grade now. Big as can be, and she's only she doesn't currently know who the Georgia kicker is. But my point is like that's how long it's been since Georgia has had anything that would be questionable with its kicking game. 2 very reliable kickers back to back like that. And so when you have any kind of issue with your kicker, you're kind of reminded, oh, this is how some college teams are every year. Well, maybe not. Maybe Woodring's kind of settling in on that, as Miriam kind of points out. Let's see what else. Adrian Eccles mentioning Dominant Lovett. So right now, I would say that things are working out the opposite that I expect them to. And it's not a bad thing. And who knows if perception doesn't change a little bit by the time the year ends. But I had very big expectations for Dominic Lovett and relatively low expectations for Ra Thomas. Well, now, after seeing both players for 6 games, my expectations for Ra Thomas are going this way, and my expectations for Dominic Lovett are kind of going this. Not shooting down the way they're shooting up for Ra. They're kind of just sort of settling down here a little bit. Now, listen, seasons are long, narratives change. Perhaps this flip-flops again before it's all said and done. But when you go out and we all said this. You go out and take 2 guys from the transfer portal. One of them's going to work, one of them's not. And you don't maybe know which one's going to be. That's why you want 2. It just sort of doubles your chances of hitting on the one that you really need. And right now it looks like that the big hit may actually end up being the opposite of the receiver that I thought it was going to be. So there you go. And Georgia took 3 transfers altogether. So one of them, all due respect, total bust, never even made it to the start of the season. The other one, Dominic Lovett, you're probably glad you have him. But here's the thing about Lovett. Georgia's still playing 2 tight end sets a good bit. And that's what Georgia's going to do. They're going to put Lindbergh in there, or they're going to put Oscar Delp in there. Georgia's not going to stop being Georgia just because it has Dominic Lovett. So some of the, where is Dominic Lovett chatter is related to, well, he's standing on the sideline watching Georgia play 2 tight end sets, because they're still going to do that. They just always have, and they've done that to great effect. Now, you can throw out of a 2 tight end set, but you're going to probably take your slot receiver out of the game in those types of situations. So that's some of what's going on. I have to confess, just to be completely honest, there is also an aspect of apparently Eli Drinkwitz is just very good at getting stats for his slot receivers. Because if you look at right now, Luther Burden, if we would say that Brock Bowers is the best pass catcher in college football, Luther Burden is in the next group below that. He really is. Marvin Harrison Jr. or blah, 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 those guys at Texas. Luther Burden is in that group. Like Burden is making a case for himself to be traditional wide receiver. In the definition of traditional wide receiver, he's making a case for himself to be the best receiver in the country right now. And a lot of what they're doing with Burden this year are some of those slot touches that Dominic Lovett got a year ago. That doesn't mean I'm saying that Lovett's overrated or like a system guy or whatever. I don't know if you can be a system receiver or not. But the Eli Drinkwitz offense is apparently very good at getting stats for its slot receivers, because they could use Burden however they wanted to, and they're using him some in the slot right now, which is, I think, a pretty interesting point. So this is about how the portal's going to go. You take 3 pretty high-profile guys. One's going to be great, one's going to be good, and one's going to be non-existent. And that's maybe what Georgia's on path to have here right now. Let's see what else. Adrian Eccles also saying really glad to have Ladd McConkey back. And that's the other dimension, Adrian. You're right about that, is that I think McConkey is still going to be your best deep threat. if that's still going to be the take the top off the defense guy, that's still going to be that. So I think it's a very important conversation. I'm glad you're bringing it up about the wide receiver situation, because pecking order does matter and hierarchy does matter. I think it does. I think you're onto something with a lot of that. That right now, Ra-Ra's been a little better. And perhaps Lovett's moment's still going to come, but there is a certain way that Georgia plays that may reduce his overall stats from what they were a year ago, and obviously getting a healthy McConkey back is pretty good. Alan Verbonchik says, I do not want Burden to be a burden on UGA's defense. Fun play on words there. Like, how big is that game if LSU doesn't beat Missouri on Saturday? I mean, it's still a very big game. But, I mean, you look at Missouri's schedule. This is a game they could have won. If they do win that, I mean, they could have been undefeated coming to Athens. Connor Riley told me before the show, or before the game Saturday, he was saying that if Missouri were to win, there's a chance that's prime time on CBS, because it's at Kentucky on Saturday, then South Carolina. I mean, Missouri could win both those games. First of all, Missouri-Kentucky is a terrific game. Missouri-South Carolina is kind of a low-key rivalry, and not just because they both share the name Columbia. But there's a very good chance that Missouri, if they figured out a way to stop Jaden Daniels and beat LSU on Saturday, they could have been undefeated. And I think Connor's right. For that November 4th matchup, that could have been prime time on CBS. Could have absolutely been that. Absolutely could have been that. And it's still a big game, and perhaps it will still be a undefeated Georgia against a one-loss team. And Luther Burden is it's a name to know at the very least. A name to know at the very least. BMAC on DawgNation.com says Mizzou plays Kentucky next week. We get to see how good both Missouri and Kentucky are, respectively. Yeah, there's a lot of fascinating SEC games for this upcoming week. Missouri, Kentucky, absolutely. Florida, South Carolina, for perhaps all the wrong reasons. The loser of that game is miserable. Now, I believe that Shane Beamer's doing a good job at South Carolina, and our concern for him has always been that sometimes your improvement is not reflected in your record. South Carolina is winning with recruits they have never won with before. I think that Beamer's doing a pretty good job there at South Carolina, but you still got to be careful not to lose too many games. And when you're a slight favorite at home, and they are, at least right now, a slight favorite over Florida, that's a pretty important game for the Gamecocks. That's just true. That's just real. That's just fair. And Florida, oh my gosh, do they need this one. Wow. We've said in the SEC, the one thing you can't say is be patient. It's just my second year, especially in the age of the transfer portal. And right now, Billy Napier needs a win, and he needs it bad. He does. He does. Because when you go out and beat Tennessee, but then give it back the next week against Kentucky, you can't be 3 losses with Georgia and LSU and Florida State still to come on your schedule. You just can't do that. At least you need to be careful about doing that at least. Randy Hall also kind of going with the rah-rah A.D. Mitchell comparison. I don't hate it. I don't hate it at all. E-Rock says, if Missouri beats LSU, comes into Athens, and loses by 3 to 4 touchdowns, everyone would just say that Missouri was overrated. E-Rock, it seems like it goes that way sometimes, doesn't it? A.J. Ferraro checks in to say, I think that Stoops is a good coach, but why go for 2? Still would have been a 3-possession game. Reminded me of 2 years ago when they tried their darndest to get the last-second insignificant touchdown. Yeah, I mean, there's very little doubt in my mind that in 2021, Stoops was kind of aware of the point spread against Georgia and was driving to get the cover. And there's just no doubt in my mind that's what he was doing. James Franklin sort of thought of as a coach notoriously famous for being aware of spreads. Perhaps Stoops was in 2021, and in somehow, some way, maybe the 2-point attempt on Saturday was in line with that. It was a weird moment. I have to say that math in the moment's not always my strong suit. So from an arithmetic standpoint, I can't quite explain why the book would say do that. It seemed a little bit weird. Perhaps he was aware somehow of the point spread. B-Mac says, be patient, everybody. It's just my second year. Oh, wait. Did you say Georgia made the championship game at Smart's second year? Oh, no. What a yardstick. That's true. Kirby plays for national championship year 2. Go back to 2002. Richt won the SEC in year 2. Nick Saban was a top 10 team, won the SEC West in his second year at Alabama. I think that Urban Meyer may have won the national championship in his second year at Florida. Is that right? That this whole like idea of like year two stuff, it just doesn't really fly too well. It does not. Brandon Griffin says 4th and goal at the 1 to win the national title. Do you want Brock Vandegrift or a direct snap to Brock Bowers? Yeah, listen, I'll take a direct snap right there to Bowers. Now, listen, do I think that Vandegrift could be a good short yardage quarterback like that? Oh, by the way, speaking of this, Brandon, Georgia kind of ran. Maybe they've done this before, but they kind of ran the Jalen Hurts play. There's part of me that thinks, and Kirby Smart probably just loved this, if they ran that sort of Jalen Hurts rugby scrum play just every single time and just maul teams 4 yards at a time, I think that Georgia probably would do that. So we may see them in a game that matters. They may do the Jalen Hurts play themselves at some point. And it does seem like if you wanted to do that, Vandegrift would be a guy you could do it with. That's interesting. All right, final comments. We got to go. Oh, by the way, how about Philip Jordan Wells checking in over here on the YouTube side of things? Boy, that's a big crossover. That's an ambitious crossover event if I ever saw one. John Main still out here calling for the likes. I appreciate that. Look at that. So this is amazing. John has got power that I don't possess. Because what John said, we had like 7 likes prior to this. I just have never really paid much attention. And John's got it up to 94 likes. John, I hope you're a salesman because if you are, I'm sure you're doing very well. Better than me anyway. Andrew Hughes says, who's the home team in Jacksonville? Have we ever worn black jerseys in Jacksonville? I never remember from year to year who's the home team and who's not. I can never remember that. Georgia did wear the heinous, hideous black pants, black helmet in 2009. I am not a fan of that look. I was very disappointed that Georgia did that day, especially just given the fact they had been embarrassed against Florida the year before and got embarrassed again in that particular game. Not a fan of that. So that was the one time they were alternates. And actually in the Jim Donnan era, they wore black pants in 98. Is that right? 98 against Florida, traditional red helmet, which back then had the black stripe on it, which was controversial. The red jersey. And they wore black pants that day. And that's the only time I believe they've ever worn. Those are the only 2 games they've ever worn black pants in. Am I right about that? Florida 09, Florida 98. Is that correct? That seems right. Let's see what else. Paul Moon says, I'd like to forget about the black helmets, black pants combo. It looked awful. It did, and it just struck the wrong vibe for me, too. It just the wrong vibe. I was so disappointed. I did not go to that game. I was watching on TV. So disappointed when they came out in that look. Christy, thanks for the kind words. Yeah, so to be honest with you, my mom has had surgery, so I have a couple things where I've kind of been bouncing around a little bit, trying to help my mom a little bit recover from her surgery. So Christy, thank you for the kind words. My mom's doing well, but she had a little surgery. John, thanks for the kind words. John Main, I really appreciate that. It's very nice of you. Thank you very much. Cassie Turner, who, by the way, has become a great caller on our Dog Nation postgame show, says, I really hope they don't ever wear that combination again. Cassie, I'm right there with you on that. Nature Gator says Florida's going to go all black versus Arkansas. Yeah, to me, that's tough. And I know this is going to come across like a Gator hater type thing, which obviously I am. But, to me, wearing black when it's not your color, I just think that's weird. I also think that Florida has changed up its uniform looks too much. The worst thing that Florida ever did was, and they won the game, so I guess the jerseys didn't hurt them, but was the 05 game when DJ was hurt and Florida wore the one sleeve that was different? That's terrible. That's really bad. Was that the 05 game they did that? That was really bad. Foster Moss, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. Paul Moon says, when we mess with the helmets, it usually looks bad. Yeah, I saw where the guy, by the way, that designed the Green Bay Packers G just recently passed away. He was 80-something years old. But, that G on the side of that red helmet with the white, It just looks amazing. And I'm sure that's a biased thing, being a fan. I'm sure everybody thinks their team's uniforms are amazing. But when those lights on a night game, when they shines on that helmet, I just think it looks unbelievable. I just think it looks amazing. I just do. I always will. Crow King says a lot of quarterbacks would be bad with the way the Alabama offensive line has struggled. It's mind-boggling. They've had so many offensive linemen we wanted. I thought that Booker would be complete stud. That's an IMG Academy kid. Yeah, thus far, the struggles of the Alabama offensive line have, to me, been one of the biggest surprises of the year. Now, I thought on Saturday the Texas A&M offensive line was really bad. They weren't giving Max Johnson, who's probably a little bit more limited, but they weren't giving him anything on Saturday, no help whatsoever. But overall, I had the Alabama offensive line as one of the nation's best, and it has not been that way thus far this season. All right, we got to get ready to go. Kenneth Holt, one more across all comment sections, and we're going to be done. So Kenneth Holt brings up something I have to admit is one of my big get off my lawn old man complaints. I do not like, and obviously it impacts me more with the Braves, I do not like the yellow and the neonish looking stuff that players are wearing now with their uniforms. I don't like it. And I know that's get off my lawn territory. I certainly understand that. But you know what? In this particular case, you can get off my lawn because I do not like it. Ozuna from the Braves does it. Acuna does it. It's actually even worse than the NBA, and I don't really care that much about the NBA, but I like sports uniforms. I'm a uniform guy, and I like for professional uniforms to look like professionals. And all these guys, like, when did everybody start wearing tights? It's like everybody's got to have tights and sleeves, and it's like the whole thing in professional sports now just sort of looks a lot less uniform than it used to. And I have to say that's a very big get off my lawn moment. In fact, I don't love like the Quikrete and like the logos in the side of the jerseys, but the dadgum like neon sleeves and, RoboCop, arm guards and things like that, like that's even worse to me. So I have to confess, I'm a little bit of an old, O-U-L-D-E. I'm a little bit of an old when it comes to people kind of adding accoutrement to what should be a uniform look. Morris Rich says, not a fan of the black uniforms, and they've been bad luck. So there you go. Silver Britches says, I hope they burn those Power Ranger uniforms from the Boise State game. Yeah, that was bad. That was bad. Ugly uniform, ugliest uniform that not only Georgia's ever worn, perhaps the ugliest uniform anyone's ever worn. Space age, but not in like a cool space age way, and sort of like a, sort of like a 1950s version of what the future was going to look like, space age type of way. Getting dragged by a group of 5 team in Atlanta. Boy, we've come a long way since then. All of us have. We've come a long way since then. Lowe says, what about the Bama fans dressed in black and white stripes on the field during their games? Reference to the officiating, which is very funny. All right, on Facebook, one final time, and then we're done for today. Adrian Eckel says, I'd love to see throwing the black jersey against a team like Vandy. Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you on that. I think that Georgia should wear them more against teams that don't matter as a way of eliminating any thought that it's a motivational ploy, that it's just a fashion choice, and sometimes Georgia wears them, sometimes it doesn't. I'd be okay with that because unlike Florida, in kind of a try-hard way, black is a school color for Georgia, and it ought to be a reasonable choice before any game. Admittedly, it's been used the wrong way in the past, and therefore there's a stigma to it, but I'd love to see Georgia just sort of destigmatize it. And it's almost like you could never even off the record talk to Kirby Smart about that because he just doesn't care about stuff like that. But if he could ever understand hey, if you want this to not be an issue you have to deal with anymore, then the thing to do is wear them more, not wear them less. And I think that would be the case. William Camacho also pointing out that Georgia doesn't do funny things with its turf, like the Smurf turf or the red turf. Other day, I've had a little bit of an issue with my TV. It does that kind of pixelation thing. I've been trying to get it fixed, and sometimes I don't know why it just keeps doing that. But the other day, I was trying to watch a Coastal Carolina game on TV, and they have the teal turf, which is, to my colorblind eyes, basically green. But my TV could not process that teal. And the whole thing, it looked like, the you know what channels when you were a kid on cable. The whole thing was like just so pixelated. The whole, I mean, like my TV could not process the teal turf for Coastal Carolina the other day. It was just a disaster, a total disaster. So yeah, there's a lot of that. All right, we got to go. Oh yeah, Miriam Corbin and Jennifer Stevenson Fleming also talking about the signal simulation thing on Georgia the other day. Here's what I find amazing about that. The stadium was so loud. You couldn't hear anything. And by the way, like I've been on the field at moments like that. You can't hear the person trying to talk to you. But somehow the officials have now deciphered that Georgia's simulating the snap count. Like how can you tell? It's too loud to hear anything. The whole point of the offense, they're having to go like silent count because of how loud the crowd is, and yet somehow the officials can hear Georgia simulating the count or whatever it was they were alleged to have done, for sure. All right, we got to go. Good stuff. Y'all have a good day. Check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Water heater, if it goes out, in many cases, RS Andrews can replace it for you the same day. So find them online at rsandrews.com. Have a wonderful day. We're back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. More fun stuff to look at as the Dogs get ready to head up to Nashville on Saturday. We'll talk to you then, everybody. Thanks for being here.